People want to know, what their job pays. And I believe, though, that the pay transparency laws are kind of missing the mark a little bit because all they're doing is showing you maybe a minimum and a midpoint of a range. It's kind of like a dead end. What employees, I think, are really saying is, I want to know how I grow my pay. Okay, this is fine. This is where I am today. But how do I grow? And I think there's a great opportunity there to change the dynamic from just an employee feeling like I'm getting paid too little, or I'm getting paid right around market, or the manager might say I'm getting paid above market and here are the reasons why, to a different kind of discussion between the immediate manager.
Hello, and welcome back to the Resilient Leader's Journey, a podcast where we navigate challenging currents in growth and change. My guest today is Scott Trumpolt, compensation consultant, coming to us via satellite from Florida. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Trent. Thank you for having me on and giving me the opportunity to address your audience.
Absolutely. The burning question my audience has is, why do people feel the need to get compensated for work at all?
Well, let's face it, we all have expenses in this world, and until they figure out a better system, I think we're just stuck with it.
Fair enough. I thought we were doing it because we love our jobs. If we love our jobs, you never work a day in your life, right?
Well, I will say that if you find your passion for what you do, then that covers a lot of ground and you can really move mountains.
Sure. Scott, what does a compensation consultant do? How do you help organizations?
Multiple ways, but when you boil it down, Trent, the main piece of it is I use the market. I use a lot of tools in analytics, although analytics is only a part of compensation because you're really dealing with livelihoods, personal livelihoods. That's why it's within human resources, and there are a lot of gray areas. But ultimately, I try in my area of human resources, which is to attract, retain, and engage employees. So, how to develop compensation solutions and to pay people properly, whether that's from a base pay perspective or a variable pay perspective or part of the two combined. It's really about how do we keep people paid appropriately for the role they're doing today, as well as what they can be doing down the road as it's linked to the business need of the organization.
Sure. The organization I ran, the COVID came, and directly after that, when we started bringing people back, the amount of increases I had to give, it felt like I was giving people increases almost every day as the market changed. What was unique about that time frame in your arena?
Well, it was like a watershed event and very transformational because before COVID, from my perspective, was I was doing a lot of physical traveling, even though obviously we already had remote ways of communicating. And not only during COVID, but after that, I found that just about everything was done remotely. And then you had a lot of employees that it was like a real cultural shift. And so from a compensation perspective, a lot of my clients were saying, well, they're working remotely, they're working in a different city, but we don't really need to have them in that city. They could be closer to us. And should we pay based on where they live as opposed to where our organization is housed, our corporate office? A lot of conversations started to develop about what is the best approach from a cost of labor perspective. I mean, your office could be in New York City, very high cost of labor, but they've got a salesman that's working for you out of the Midwest in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which has a lower cost of labor. So figuring out, is it demotivational or motivational? What's the proper approach? Are we competing for other salesmen locally? Or does the local market matter in Milwaukee as far as hiring salespeople? All of these different factors come into play. So that's the biggest thing that I noticed was when it became the culture of working remotely, how did that affect compensation?
Sure.
So I always assess cost of labor, but it got to be an even bigger issue.
And that was 5 years ago. That was a big shift in the curve, we'll say, or a jump in the curve even. But the opportunity to work remotely is still here. So that's become the new norm or new accepted with many organizations
Yeah.
as compensation leveled itself out in a way to accept hybrid workers and remote workers into the workforce? Or is there still some level of uneasiness with respect to compensation?
You mean compensation from the aspect of working remotely or working in the
Yes,
office? Yeah.
yes.
I've heard really a mixed bag. I talked to one CEO that I was doing a project on, and at first he was like, I was totally against the idea of remote work. But when it was forced upon us during COVID and everything, I got used to it, and I actually found it to be quite productive for
Mm,
my employees. So that was one opinion. But you're seeing a shift. Every other day, I'm seeing in the news about a company that's mandating at least 2 to 3 days working in the office, a full day in the office. So it seems like we're gravitating towards a mixed mode situation. So to answer your question, there still is some uneasiness. And when I get brought into it is really about this idea of what is logical for us from a remote pay perspective. I know they're living in a lower cost of labor, and I have to look at the different factors to see what makes sense. So it's still out there. I think it's still in flux. There's some resistance. It's a mixed bag.
sure. Jamie Dimon or Solomon from Goldman Sachs, maybe a year and a half ago, said, if my people want to earn New York money, they need to be in New York with me. Are you hearing more of that happen? Is there being more push to have people come back into the office?
Yes.
Why do you
Yeah.
think that? What's the
But
benefit or drawback of that in your mind?
it might be that some of the executives just viewed that whole period as an aberration with the remote work.
Is there a benefit to the company or not now that hybrid's out there, remote work is out there?
Well, the benefit can be that, especially with the younger generations, they like the independence, the freedom. It's much more of an important benefit to them than it was for multiple generations. And the reason I can say that with some confidence is it comes up in a lot of employee engagement surveys. How does human resources, or how does a company for that matter, know they're doing well from an employee engagement perspective? Is they're doing these surveys. Oftentimes you hear about these companies 100 best places to work or 50 best places to work, and a lot of that is geared towards employee engagement. Now the big question, which I haven't seen a lot of data on, is the effectiveness of remote workers in terms of engagement levels. And then the idea is the higher employee engagement levels is supposed to impact the bottom line in a positive fashion. So I haven't seen anything definitive coming out, while remote workers are more productive. The employees will say that, but that's anecdotal.
Right. Who says they're not? I'm not. Who says they're less productive?
Hmm. Yeah. So, but having said that, I am keen to the trends of what's going on in these different companies from an employee engagement perspective, because frankly, in human resources, I mean, we're not a profit center. We're not operations and sales. We're not driving those kind of bottom line results for companies. So we work indirectly. And so I'm always looking at how can we improve employee engagement in whatever aspect we do for human resources? Because if we can move the needle in that respect, I mean, that's the best compliment I ever had in my consulting career, which has been, I was in corporate for about 18 years, and then the past 12 and a half I've been a consultant. And I had one client tell me after we completed a project and months down the road that it did move the needle on employee engagement, some of the things that we were doing, because they asked specific questions in that engagement survey. And that really made me feel good, because that's not always so easy. Everything looks good on paper, and it was about linking career development to competitive based pay. And where does the individual go from where they are today? Because that's how they're going to grow their pay.
Sure. You described that younger workers have a different perspective. There are now 5 generations working in the workforce right now. Are you finding that certain of those generations, whether it be Gen Z or Gen Alpha, have different expectations with respect to the compensation than, say, a Gen X or Boomers?
Absolutely. The
What are
biggest
they?
one, the very biggest one, is this idea of pay transparency. You will know that some states, not the majority of states, but it's growing slowly, are implementing laws where you have to share a pay range some companies were already doing something like this voluntarily, but you literally, in these states, you have to share a pay range with the candidates that are being hired into a job, or share information ranges with employees within a company during a certain period of time. So there's some variation, but pay transparency continues to come up. People want to know, what their job pays. And I believe, though, that the pay transparency laws are kind of missing the mark a little bit, because all they're doing is showing you maybe a minimum and a midpoint of a range. It's kind of like a dead end. What employees, I think, are really saying is, I want to know how I grow my pay. Okay, this is fine. This is where I am today. But how do I grow? And I think there's a great opportunity there to change the dynamic from just an employee feeling like I'm getting paid too little, or I'm getting paid right around market, or the manager might say you're paid above market and here are the reasons why, to a different kind of discussion between the immediate manager, the most important individual in the employee's employee engagement factor, talking about career development and linking it to the business need. So that's what I see coming out of pay transparency. But if there's one thing that I noticed, all the other prior generations keep that quiet. And compensation in and of itself is very much in the shadows. And I try within reason to get it out of the black box.
One of the operations that I ran was a construction testing. It had lower level employees, lower initial skill set coming in, and got paid a lower wage to start. But we gave them 5 marks. If they earned any of these 5 certifications, each one raised
Yep.
their income. So coming in the door, they knew, well, I'm starting down here, but I have clear steps that I can go to earn more. What you were describing a minute ago with this pay transparency, I've seen in whether it be Indeed, where you can have a job and it has a range from 150 to 450,000. That's not particularly helpful, right?
Right. That's why, I call it a dead end. I mean, some will post the entire range. And like you say, I mean, all right, well, and people are wondering, well, what does the market actually pay? And so some companies are just posting the minimum to the midpoint. But then the question becomes immediately to the employee, well, why aren't I paid at the midpoint then? So that's where this dialogue and this conversation starts to take place.
How does that happen when you're putting an ad out and there are 2,000 people applying to this? How do HR departments, companies communicate this path? Do they do it individually or collectively?
Oh, you mean once the employee is in the door or they're
No,
interviewing
no,
for the job?
before companies is hiring for a new position and rather than just put this dead end number in there, how are they going to communicate the path for each person?
Well, I think they are, because it's from a simplicity standpoint and to comply with the laws. As far as advertising the position, they're going to put that range out there. But then when the candidate comes in to interview for the job, I think it's very important if the company has things like a career architecture visual that they can share with the employee, which is not confidential in the sense of it doesn't have employee data in it or anything like that. But it shows, hey, we're bringing you in, we're hiring you as an intermediate level accountant. This is the next step that you would be. This is our career development pathway for accountants. And that's things that a lot of my clients, we've built a career architecture so that, yes, the mass of candidates aren't going to get that level of detail. But at least the candidates that they're really zeroed in on that are coming in the door, we're going to be able to explain to them briefly that we believe in a career path, and you're coming in the door as this, but here are the opportunities to move up. And it may also be that you may have to move laterally in the organization to then move up further.
It's been my observation that people in younger generations are willing to accept other trade-offs for cash. Are you seeing that same thing? And if so, why is that becoming more of a trend?
That's why a lot of companies are, and there's some really creative benefits out there. We could have a discussion just on that in terms of what some companies are doing in this area. But a lot of it is based on survey input, that they want things that they believe improve the quality of their life, because they're sitting back and saying, hey, I'm spending all of these hours. Work is a huge part of my life. So what are the intrinsic benefits that, and yes, especially with the younger generations, there's a lot of things that they're interested in, not just some of the traditional things like, well, what's the paid time off program, but other types of insurances that aren't typical that you would see in an organization. Of course, you've got the health insurance. They want options within that, not that just this is it
Sure.
and
Right.
that's so you get that kind of feedback in engagement surveys and you adapt as best you can if it's part of your culture. You don't want to force fit something. So I have not seen one company have the same exact benefits package.
We did an engagement survey about benefits, and the top item that came back to us was we want pet insurance.
Hmm. I was almost going to mention that.
And so we added a pet insurance option for them. It's not subsidized by the company, but it's made available by the company. But it satisfied the ask for the certain number of employees that have that as a concern.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes that companies also fall a little bit short in terms of the transparency of really employees knowing what they're getting by joining this company. I remember when I was working for one company and I was talking to the director of benefits, and they had kept the premium, the cost that the employees paid, stable for 3 years. And I thought that that was a significant achievement, but they didn't advertise it really to the population. And I thought that was a missed opportunity. Hey, sometimes you got to blow your own horn when there's real value to it. And I thought that was a substantial accomplishment. And so with total reward statements, sometimes I think employees don't even know all the things that companies are providing, and giving a breakdown, I think, is very important.
It sounds we have employees, I'm sure at all levels in all organizations that complain that the benefits aren't good enough in any stretch. And I've used the term one time, how about I just give you the cash and you buy everything? Do you know companies that make those choices?
I have worked across a lot of different industries and a lot of different size companies. I personally haven't seen that. I've heard of companies doing that they have a pot of money and they say, here are the different benefits, and you can, it's like a menu a la carte and pick different things. I just haven't personally seen it.
Sure.
Usually they've, for various reasons, they've got a standard program, just being honest.
No, that's exactly right. Part of it is I would say that when I'd get angry sometimes because
Yeah.
we were working so hard to provide the best we could to make it a quality place to one of the 100 best places to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
The what made you decide to be a compensation consultant? How did you niche down to there?
Yeah, it's interesting how things fall into place. I had got my bachelor's degree in a different discipline, and I worked in that discipline for a few years, but then I went back to school and I got my master's degree in human resources. And they had an opening, very low level, but it was perfect for me because they wanted to try me out into different areas of human resources. And very quickly, they saw that I had a knack for compensation. And I worked under two gentlemen. One of them was the head of human resources that used to be a comp person strictly, and the other one was a compensation manager. And was very lucky that I had those mentors because they really taught me about how to use the data to tell a story, a true story about what's going on in a department from a comp perspective, linking it to why it might be an issue related to turnover or morale, and pulling all those pieces together. And I did that for about 4 years. And aside from, they had also recommended to me that I do a stint as an HR generalist, which I did as a director of an IT startup for almost 4 years.
Mhm.
But other than that, I've been in the compensation realm because they planted that seed by giving me that opportunity. And so once I locked into that, I said, and it just grew over time, my interest in, and things were a lot different when I started. I mean, we would get these binders of market data once a year, and by the time you got them, the data would be
Right.
out
Yeah.
of issue.
Relevance. Yeah.
It was outdated to where things are now. And I have so many tools automatically at my disposal, so I can literally do this out of my house. But the initial passion was generated as that second crack at how I wanted to live my work life.
Sure. Sure. I like the work that you're doing primarily because it's data driven. I get geeked out by data driven jobs. How can people, Scott, get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and the reason I point to LinkedIn is because it has all sorts of other connective opportunities, such as the fact that a website, HR Compensation, www.hrcompensationconsulting.com. My website is being redesigned. It's relaunched this month, and I'm really
Congratulations.
excited about that.
I will send them there. Scott, one last question for you today. Who is your favorite fictional character?
Fictional character. I would have to say Gandalf, the wizard.
Gandalf the Grey.
Yes,
Why is
because
Gandalf your favorite fictional character?
he embodies all of the different aspects that I think are important in a leader. He's powerful, yet he has humility. And I think humility is often overlooked. It's not a weakness, it's a strength. I think it can bring people together as a leader. And I just think he was the total package. So if I had to pick a fictional character who was powerful yet down to earth, that's what resonates with me.
A very wonderful choice. Scott Trumpolt, compensation consultant. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
Resilient leaders face challenging currents, and it's tough navigating. But with one tack or another, we can get there together. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe. You can find me on LinkedIn or my YouTube channel, or you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or the like. And don't be afraid to tell a friend about it as well. So it's a pleasure to see you this week, and I look forward to the next one. Bye for now.